We are now on part 5, eminent domain valuation. We're going to talk about temporary easements and then we're going to summarize. Compensation for temporary easements needed for construction of the project. Acronym for that is TCE. These are not permanent encumbrances on the property. Their short-term duration starts during the construction phase of the highway project, after ODOT or its contractor enters on to the property. At this point in time, ODOT has obtained control of the permanent fee acquisitions and the permanent easements needed for the project. The parts taken, which are fee acquisitions and perpetual easement acquisitions, are compensated based on an allocation of value from the whole property before the taking. Temporary construction easements are not compensated for in this manner. Compensation estimates for temporaries are based on the residue property because when their short duration terminates, the property owner receives back all rights they conveyed. The temporary construction easement becomes fully functional residue property. Therefore, the compensation estimate is based on the residue property. From Ohio jury instruction, a temporary easement is the right to use an area of land for a limited time and for limited purposes. The measure of compensation for temporary takings is the fair market value of the loss of use of the property taken. That fair market value is lost rent. For rented properties, we use lost rents. Otherwise, we're going to use the fair rental value. So if it's just vacant land, and it's not impacting any structures or anything on the property, then it's the fair rental value. If we are impacting the property such that units can't be occupied, then at that point in time, it becomes lost rents. ODOT implements this instruction to estimate the fair market value for a temporary as follows. It's the area encumbered by the temporary construction easement times the unit of value of the residue property, and that equals the value of the temporary construction easement. Now remember, for simplistic acquisitions where we're using the value analysis report, somebody has already determined that there is no damages to the property, and so therefore the unit of value of the land before the taking is the same as the unit value of the land after the taking. So there would be no difference in those unit values. All right, so the value of the temporary construction area is then multiplied by an overall capitalization rate appropriate for the residue property. Because when we multiply value times a rate, that gives us annualized rent for the temporary construction area. Annualized rent is then multiplied by the duration of the temporary construction easement. If the duration was 1 year, then that annualized rent would be multiplied by 1. If the temporary construction easement was 6 months, then that annualized rent would be multiplied by 0.50, which would be 1/2 of a year, to get the fair rental value. Here's an example. Assume the temporary construction area is 1,500 square feet, and the residue is valued at $6 a square foot. Let's assume the duration of that temporary easement is 6 months, and finally, let's assume the capitalization rate for the residue land is 8.25%. So here's the math for that. It's 1,500 square feet, the area encumbered by the temporary, times the unit value of $6 a square foot, times the capitalization rate. We're converting a fraction to a decimal, so it'd be 0.0825, times the duration, which is half a year, so that's 0.50. We multiply all that together, it gives us the fair market rent for the temporary construction easement of $371. Improvements removed by a temporary construction easement and are not replaced as part of the project are a permanent take, and the value allocated to these improvements are based on their contribution to the whole property before the taking and are included in the part taken. In almost all situations, there are no temporary damages because damages are permanent, and if they exist, are to be considered in the before and after valuation methodology. Other issues, such as temporary lost parking caused by the temporary, are compensated for by lost rent during the duration of the temporary construction easement. In the rare instance that damages to the residue may be viewed as occurring, we need to call the ODOT district office for guidance. So, in summary, compensation. Compensation for the part taken is based on evaluation of the whole property. It ignores project influence. It allocates the value of the part taken based on the value of the whole property. Compensation for damages to the residue. It's based on a before and after valuation methodology that allocates out the part taken, leaving the estimate for total damages uncured. The residue valuation does not ignore the project, and it considers the project as completed. Damages can be minimized by a proven cost to cure. Compensation for temporary construction easements. It's based on a valuation of the residue property. It is the estimate of the land rent for the duration of the temporary construction easement. So once compensation is estimated by the appraiser, what happens then? The appraisal report is reviewed by an ODOT-approved review appraiser. That reviewer determines if the appraisal meets standards and reflects fair compensation. If that occurs, the reviewer recommends the appraisal as the basis for the offer, and the appraisal review is required by 49 CFR Part 24, 104 in Ohio, also in Ohio Administrative Code. So anytime that an appraisal is used, it must be reviewed. An exception to this is for appraisal waivers, which would be the value analysis report. It is not mandatory that a review occur. After recommendation by the reviewer, FMVE is established by an ODOT employee who is a person of authority within the Ohio Department of Transportation. Generally, the person establishing FMVE is the district real estate administrator. A consultant cannot establish FMVE, and that comes right out of Federal Code 49 CFR Part 24. No offer can be made until FMVE is established. That regulation also comes out of 49 CFR Part 24. After FMVE is established, a written offer is made reflecting the established FMVE. That offer is made on a mandatory form called the Notice of Intent to Acquire in Good Faith Offer. That is mandated by Ohio Revised Code Section 163.04. The appraisal that the offer was based on is provided to the owner during the offer. That also is mandated by Ohio Revised Code.